Hey there, Wargamers, Just Iron Paint here, and today we're going to take our Beta Galaxy Clan Wolf Turkina to the next level. I'd like to welcome you guys back to the channel. Thank you for tuning in today. If you are new here, please alpha strike that like and subscribe button. Smash it with all that ferocity that you would put into trying to fell the enemy mech, but instead, let's focus that energy into helping the channel grow. If you are a returning viewer, thank you. You're awesome. I appreciate your support. You're like a good Sibkin in the Sibco, a lance mate, a star colonel, as it were, in your own right. I'm just kind of saying shit now, but thank you. I appreciate you tuning in. Now, if you are tuning in now and you are unsure of what we're doing, I had a video up of how to get to this guy in the current state, which I think is really good for you guys if you're trying to get to a good quality fast with your Beta Galaxy Clan Wolf minis. It also uses the speed paints from Army Painter to good effect quickly. That said, if you want to take this to the next level, there are a few things that I would do. The first of which is going to be toning down the colors a little bit and getting some more depth and enhancing this, and then using an oil wash. So the first thing that I will do is we want to enhance the top portion here color-wise. The way I do that with my Beta Galaxy is I like to use contrast paint Wildwood from Citadel. Now, you could use a paint from the Army Painter Speed Paints line. I haven't, because I've been using this for my Beta Galaxy already, and I know how it's going to work and what I want to do. That said, you probably could use the, what was it, the brown color, wood, it's something wood, this is really good, so I have these colors on hand. The Speed Paint for Army Painter, that wood color, if you thin it down, could probably give you a nice transition too, but we're going to be using the Wildwood today. That said, when I use this, I thin it down tremendously. It is super duper thin, so we're going to go ahead and do 2 drops, I think. Does not take a lot of this. This is a very pigment rich contrast paint, and I usually do like 5 parts to 1 paint. I think today we're going to aim towards let's try 8. We can always add more paint. So we've got 4 drops in there. I'm going to do, whoops, that was the wrong thing. I was about to use varnish. We're going to use our magic mix here from Josana. I really like that. It's good stuff. I use it a lot for glazing, but I find it's a good replacement for medium as well, and it slows the dry time too. So we're going to count drops. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and there's always that inevitable bonus drop that the bottle gives me. Boop. And then I'm going to come in with just a little bit of my water mix, and we're going to do 4 more drops. All right, so, then my math is wrong. If I did 8 parts to 1, I needed 16, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 12. That's 6. All right, let's go ahead and let's finish it out. And if we're unhappy, I'll add a little bit more. This is always a little bit of a play moment. I figure out what I like by feel, and it's a little different every time, but we're going to try the 8 to 1, because I feel like when I did my Beta Galaxy last time, it wasn't quite as subtle as I wanted, and I had to do more dry brushing to bring it back in line. So again, you can always add more paint, can't add less, so we'll start thin here, and we'll see how we like it, and if we don't, we'll make adjustments. But I think at this point, this mix is looking pretty decent for where I want to be. I think that is what we're going to use. All right. Yeah, that looks, actually, you know what, that still looks a little strong. Let's add a couple more drops. Actually, I added 4 more. Like I said, this is not an exact science, so at this point we're at, what was that, 10 to 1, I think is the math. And what might have happened is I don't think I cleaned my brush, and it probably still had a drop of my contrast paint in there, so it threw our mix out of whack. So let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit here. And we'll start applying this all over the top portion. Like we did in our airbrush video, we're going to start with the barrels and see if we like the look. I think that is pretty decent, so we're going to go for full coverage here. And we're looking to have a thin coat. We're not looking for crazy pooling, so you can sop it up. We're just basically kind of tinting the surface and getting a nice amount of color in the recesses and tying it kind of all together. Sometimes when I paint, I like to give myself a little bit of a soundtrack. When I'm filming, I don't often have my music playing, so gotta have a soundtrack in my head while I'm doing this. So you guys are probably watching, and you're probably thinking, man, Justin's painting, you know what would be good? Music. But I think we're trying this kind of thing without music for now, and we'll progress as the channel goes and see what kind of changes we want to make. But I'm really liking where that's at, and again, much like the Army Painter ones, the GWA contrast paints, there you can get some really subtle effects with them just by thinning. Like, look at the difference there. And this is like liquid talent. We're not having to work too hard. We're trying to work quick because we don't want to, you can still sop this up while it's here, but we don't want to be having to come back and try and sop some off after it starts to dry, then you'll start getting splotching. So we're moving quick, but even so, nice effects without having to work too hard at it. You can see like that really brings everything together. It gets a nice recess coloration going on there, or depth. I really like it. This is probably one of my favorite steps because it really helps the Mini come alive. And unfortunately on the Turkina, it's got this really large surface area, so I'm trying to be pretty cognizant of where stuff's the paint's landing and trying to prevent too much pooling. These large surface areas can be a little tricky and hard to get your clean brush strokes that you want. So be cognizant of that and be patient. Also, don't beat yourself up if you don't get it perfect. You're practicing, you're learning. You know, as I was once told, you got to be kind to yourself. We are sometimes our own worst critics, and sometimes in our heads we start getting going and start saying things like, "Oh, you can't do this. This is the worst." Don't do that. Don't do that. You know, you got me here. We're working on painting the Mini. I'm hopefully giving you some tools that you can employ on your minis, and maybe it's not even the same technique. Maybe you're not even painting a Beta Galaxy Clan Wolf. Maybe you just wanted to learn to do the beige or something else, or just some of these techniques, or you're listening to me ramble. But I think these tools may be helpful for you on other projects as well. If you watched the first video, which if you're watching this one, you probably did. If you haven't, you should go back and watch that. Ding, ding, ding. Good idea. But yeah, I digress. If you did watch that first video, some of the key points you might pick up from that are seeing that I started by pre-shading the Mini, which really helps with the contrast paint or speed paints that you're using. And then we used an airbrush to apply those paints and get a nice transition without really even having to work at it. I think total start to finish, or start to the state this was at the beginning of this video, was like 20 minutes. Pretty speedy. And honestly, you could skip this and at that 20-minute mark start painting your barrels, throw some colors in the tips of those or something, and call it good if you wanted to. And with that said, with the ramble in, I'm liking where that's at. We're going to go ahead and let that dry, and then we're going to prep for the leg step now. And just like that, with a little bit of our hair dryer, the top surface is dry here. That actually took a little longer than expected, specifically because this stuff right here really slows down the dry time, which is really nice. It also makes applying glazes and things of that nature super easy. And we'll notice I'll bring in to bear a note here, because I think it's important for you guys to see that I too am human. This spot right in here, I didn't get the coverage quite the way I wanted, so at some angles, actually it's not looking too bad, but in some angles you can kind of see, yeah, there it is, a little discoloration. It's a little darker than I wanted. That wasn't my bad. Not the end of the world, but that is again why on this large surface area I was really trying to pull the paint, and I've got a lot of experience working on that, and I too still missed it there, so it does happen. So if that happens to you, don't stress. That said, the next thing we're going to do is target enhancing the legs a little bit here, and for that I've got a sticky note that I have had for probably since 2017 or 18, and this is my mix for black if I want to put a glaze over it and get a tone that I like. It's a 10-to-2 or 5-to-1 mix, and I've written down what I like. So for that, we're going to be using some inks. For that, we're going to be using, this is Tenebris Blue, I believe, from Green Stuff World. Give that a shake. 2 drops. Whoa. Our lid came off, so let me fix this, and we'll be back with 2 drops. And we're back with this in a functioning order. 1, 2 drops. Doesn't take much. This stuff is pretty intense. I really like the Green Stuff World inks for adding some color to a Mini without having to work too hard. It's really nice. Let's see if this one's doing the same thing. No. Okay, so let's go ahead and give ourselves 10 drops. What? It's going to drip. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now this is the mix that I use when I'm doing bulk army, so this is going to be way more than we probably need, but this is what we are going to be working with. So we've got our 10-to-2 black. Now I have, oh my god, I've had this thing for 5 years, and now I've gotten paint drops on it. That is fantastic. All right, so we're going to come in and we're going to, I have merged the glaze and medium part of this, so we're going to be using this now instead of glaze and medium. So we're going to be doing 6 of these instead of 3 and 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just counting drops. It's not an exact science, but that's what I'm doing. Now we've got flow improver. That helps it, I feel like, thin it out. 1, 2 drops. Now this mix may be overkill. This is just what I do. Again, it's a lot of stuff going on, but it's something I came up with when I was live streaming on Twitch back in the day, and I've kept up with it. That said, let's go ahead and mix up our secret sauce here. And it's black that has a little hint, a little touch of blue. And if you don't like the blue as much, you can use a little less, or you can just go with black. Now, there are other things you can use, like Nuln Oil, for example, but I find that to be a little bit intense. I find the inks thin down and give me a little bit more of a tint versus like a wash, and that is what I like. I also like a little hint of blue in my black washes over black or gray. That said, I think we are in good shape here to get ready. I've cleaned up my brush. And we're going to get a brush full, and then we're going to start covering the legs of our Turkina. And immediately it's starting to give us some depth here that we otherwise might not have had. And again, you don't have to do this. As the point of this video is extra things you can do to take your mini to the next level. And I find that adding this is subtle. It brings a lot of things together, and it's a nice little step. And if you start adding tools to your toolbox, when you approach a project, you can determine for yourself what level of time investment you want to spend, what is acceptable for you. And if you're like, hey, you know, the airbrushing of the speed paints over the zenithal and pre-shade was where I want to be, I'll come in and I'll do some targeted details like barrels and jeweling, and then I'll be done. That is perfectly acceptable, and I think a great place to be. But if you're wanting to do a little extra, you know, having those tools and knowing what you want to do and being able to utilize them is also good. And so that's why I'm kind of showing you guys as we go all the things that I may do or consider doing for a project, and I don't always do all of them. It depends on what is the target at hand, especially if it's a project that resonates with me. I've got some minis that aren't like my #1 favorites. Like I did Comstar and they look okay. I've got my Swordsworn / Davian. They're okay. But my like Beta Galaxy Clan Wolf, which is this, and I don't know if this guy's going to be to the same time investment as the others, but that's one where my models have a lot of time put into them. My Wolf's Dragoons, same thing, because that's my main force. But my Kuretans, my Swordsworn, my Davian, or which I guess Sword is Swordsworn, sorry, and my Comstar are all like pretty fast paint jobs for what they are. I'm working on some Republic of the Sphere minis right now for YouTube, so that I have some stuff for battle reports, different forces. I'm trying to like have a large collection. Oh, I should have said my Jade Falcons. I spent a lot of time on those too. A lot of care went into them. I was painting that stuff for CSO. Also, Randall Bills from CGL had given me the Alpha Strike box pretty early, so I really wanted to do right by him by painting up what he had given me. And with that, a little ramble later, we've got our tint down on our mini. All we need to do is let this dry, and we'll see what he's looking like. With our Turkina's legs pretty well dry, now we're going to come in for the next step to enhance this guy, and that's going to be another layer of dry brush, just to get a little bit more of a targeted highlight that makes it look like we worked harder on it than we did. For that, we're going to be using our ivory again, and what's going to happen here is we have put that wildwood contrast over the top. When we hit with the dry brush, these are going to look a little brighter on the edges and hopefully make it look like we spent some extra time on it when we did not. So we're going to grab one of our Army Painter dry brushes here. Going to work that paint into our paper towel. I mean, let me zoom out here. I didn't show this in the first video, but in case you guys aren't familiar with this, I'm working the paint into the paper towel. And some of it's into the bristles, but we want not a lot left on the paintbrush when we go to put it on the miniature. One of the things I'll do is I'll target the back of my hand and see how the paint is coming off. Didn't look like we had much left, so we're going to start on the gun here and see if we're getting any to come off the brush, or did I indeed pull too much off. And I think we might be in good shape. I'm going pretty light here and kind of trying to aim towards the front, not going for full coverage. So you're not seeing me go all the way to the back here, kind of focusing on the spots that will be the brightest. So you can see this side versus this one, it's a little bit brighter. So it's subtle, but it's what I like to do. Now I also will follow this up sometimes with a manual edge highlight, just to make it pop a little bit more. So the amount of time you spend on a mini is up to you. You can always do more or less. But this is what I like to do. Even again on my Beta Galaxy, I did this as well before the edge highlights, just to get it in a decent transition before I started working on the painstaking edge highlight process that I would go through. Which for that, generally I'll come in with the ivory and I'll do a hand edge highlight on the edges there. An edge highlight's on the edge, Justin? No. Yeah, but the edge highlight will be a little bit more intense than the dry brush, so it makes it look like you spent a lot more time than you did if you do it over the dry brushed area. So that's why I like to do that. And in here, I am doing a little bit of a swirl on the nose, basically, so that we get that little bit of a transition here. And there we go. I think I might fade that back a little bit more. I feel like the transition across the canopy was a little bit, need a little bit more of that light ivory faded back. So again, coming in, fading that back. Also, that's still obviously there, but it's a little less obvious now, which is nice. And let's get a little bit more paint on here, and we'll get this gun over here. And let's give them one more pass across the edges and the front. And I think that's looking pretty good. Got a nice transition across the top, and then with some Clan Wolf decals on here, this guy will be popping. Now, the next thing we're going to do is the same thing with the bright neutral gray over our black areas that have been washed. And we're going to make, for this one, we're going to be using a different style of dry brush. We've got these wet makeup applicators or makeup brushes that we use at work. They're super cheap and they do a hell of a job on dry brush work because of the interesting fades that they can get you pretty easily. So I'm working some of that gray paint into the bristles, and I think we're good to go. So we'll come over here and we'll go and hit some of these edges. Had a little bit too much paint there, so it was a kind of just a little streaky. Not the end of the world given where it was, but it was a little streaky. I was getting a little carried away, a little ahead of myself. But nonetheless, getting interesting edges without having to work too terribly hard. I feel like we ran out of paint quick, so we'll load this back up. And you could come in, and again, you could enhance this by doing some manual edge highlights. That works as well. You can work this until your heart is content with the amount of effort you've put in. But I think the dry brush is probably pretty good place to get a lot of work done on these mechs, especially for Battletech minis. It'll do you a lot of good. Don't gotta slave too much. And you can see those legs are really coming together. Nice transition. Of course, the edge highlights will be definitely more crisp, but this is where we are. Now, from this point, I would prepare for an oil wash, which I will show you today, and that is where we will end. For an oil wash, the first step is going to be hitting this guy with gloss varnish, but we're going to let this guy dry first. With our mini dry, I went ahead and hit it with gloss varnish. For that, I like using the Liquitex gloss varnish. I use the gloss varnish, not the high gloss, because I find that the high gloss is a little too much for some of the things that I like to do with it. In addition to that, we are going to be using some oil washes today from Mr. Hobby. Those washes are going to include ground brown and multi black, and we also have the solvent, which is going to be necessary for this to work. And then we have got some applicators here wherever they went, to here, there, for cleaning up. So with that said, we're going to start with our black and our solvent. So I've got a little container here that we can put a little solvent into. Having a little eyedropper is very, very helpful for this, but we'll just pour some in here, and that should be more than enough for our purposes today. Now, caveat, when you are working with this stuff, do not use a good brush. It will tear brushes up, so keep that in mind. All right, so let's go ahead and give that a shake. Extra shake. And here we go. So I'm going to be using a poo-poo brush, as I call it, a brush that I don't mind tearing up. It's also worth noting that cleaning this, water is not the best solution. So you've got this mineral spirits, essentially this is what the solvent is, or something close to it, that'll help clean these and also be used for the process of applying this. And then you can use a brush cleaner afterwards. So one of the things I'll do is I'll take this solvent or mineral spirit type stuff and I'll put it on the surface that I'm going to be hitting with an oil wash. And what this is going to do is give it an area for the oil wash to wick around and help us maneuver everything. So got that on. Now I'll dip my brush in and I'll get some of the black and then we'll dab it on here. And depending on the areas you're working on, it can really wick across the mini, or you may have to like kind of manipulate or move it around to where you would like it to be, but not too bad. When we get to the torso, you'll really see kind of what I'm talking about. And what this is doing is just really going to add some depth to the recesses of our panels. And don't be afraid to be a little messy here. There will be a cleanup step at the end that will clean up a lot of our mistakes, hide our sins, so to speak. So get a little bit of the solvent, move across the little hip area there. And as you go, you'll start to notice that some of the solvent is mixing with your oil wash as you go. So you can kind of get a flow and get used to what you're liking seeing. This is a little bit more prominent when you're on things like the Timberwolf, where you can see it on the legs a little bit better. I mean, I guess it's got some decent legs, but I feel like the Timberwolf, it really pops. But we'll get through here. And you notice I didn't fully prep this one before I started applying the oil wash. It's because my brush was pretty well saturated with wash and the solvent, so I just kind of started going at it. Once it's wet again, we can come back in with some solvent and really get that in there. And I'm just really making sure I get full coverage. And there we go. I think that is going to be pretty good on the black. We'll let that dry, but while it's drying, we're going to go ahead and prep this, the brown, for the top part of our mini. So for that, I like to mix a little bit of the black. So we're going to go 1 to 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we'll call it 5, and we'll close that up. And we're going to get some of our brown here, because I don't want to do straight black on this. You could, but I like doing a little bit of brown so it's not pure black. And I think with the beige that is going to yield decent results. So we're going to go 1 to 1. See how we like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. That seems pretty good to me. Give this a little mix up here. Yeah, so kind of a dark brown, like a little black brown. And I think that's going to look better over our kind of ivory color that we've got on the torso there. Now, one caveat I will say when you're doing these two tones, be careful when you apply the oil wash, because it is going to want to wick, so some of this might come down onto the legs. Not the end of the world, but just be aware. So, getting our solvent here, you can already see that what was in the brush is coming off and really already wicking into the mini here. Which is really good, giving us that definition. Now if you come in with some of this and just get it on there. Okay, and we're going to get some on the underside here. Okay, come in with our guns. And again, don't be afraid to get good coverage on this, because we will come back when it's dry and we will clean her up. So we're looking for us to get all these areas with our wash. So it's not, I would say this is not rocket science, but it takes some getting used to. Okay, I think I'm reasonably happy with that. It's going to start wicking around, so let's come over to the other rocket pod. You notice I'm kind of going back and forth between the solvent and the oil wash, which is fine. Oops, had a little splash. Not the end of the world. Okay, I think I'm digging where that's at. I am going to make sure that the rocket pods aren't too saturated, because that's a little harder to clean. And we'll come over and get his little gun arms. Really fine. Yeah, you can see it really wicked down on there. I find this Mr. Hobby oil wash to be pretty intense. You really need that solvent to make it work. It's fine right out of the bottle if you're on a gloss surface with solvent, but you need the solvent to make it go, because the bottle is not super duper thin. It's not going to like wick down. You kind of have to mix it, which is fine, which is why I kind of put some on the surface. If it doesn't go where I want, I grab a little bit of solvent and I go back and forth. So not the end of the world. And you'll notice some is dripping off down at the bottom, and that's because it's what it likes to do. It's going to run downhill. So we're going to put a little bit more on the head of the Mini here, just to clean it up, make sure I get the areas nice and dark where I want them. Again, don't stress too much. We're going to clean this up anyway, so I'm kind of going for extra coverage on here. So with that being said, that is in a good state. The next thing I'm going to do is dry this model, and then we will prep for cleanup. With our Mini dry, it's time to come in with our makeup applicators. Now, we've still got our solvent here, which is reasonably fine to dip this in. So we're going to dip, and I'll usually take this and dab it on a paper towel to get a little excess off, and we'll come in and start cleaning. Now, you'll notice, you may notice, it may not be obvious on screen, this stuff's not quite as shiny as it was at the beginning. That's because with the oil wash dried, it kind of becomes matte. So we're going to come in here with our Q-tip or makeup applicator, which I prefer, and start cleaning off the top surface. We're not trying to necessarily clean the whole model. We're cleaning the top surface. We're getting that residual oil wash off the top. This part can take some time, and it's pretty messy, but you'll see like the results there. It got the recesses nice and dark. We get a little bit of a gradient in some areas, and it really helps things pop. Is this step required, or is the oil wash step required on Minis? No, but I do think it's worth it, and the time investment on it is actually not too bad. I think I've done it even on my speed paint jobs for my other armies as well, just because it's really easy and it adds a lot of depth. And you can see here, look at his left leg versus the right one. Now the right one does have the oil wash on it, so it's innately darker, but this just, it pops, right? And I really like that. So let's flip our makeup applicator, get a little bit more, and dab it off, and we'll come over here and clean this leg now. And I think we're going to be in a pretty good spot with our Turkina. I like these makeup applicators because they're soft. They don't really tear up the Mini too much. Sometimes the Q-tips, I find, can scratch paint a little bit off, and also they'll sometimes leave a lot of like fuzzies, and these makeup applicators don't. So that's why I prefer them. But if you don't have makeup applicators handy, and you've got all your other stuff, or you run out, which I'm about to, I've got 4 left, hopefully enough to finish this video, right? You can use Q-tips. It's not the end of the world. They do work. Just a little bit more finesse. And I think that is good on our legs, nice and popping. Grab a fresh Q-tip, and now we'll start working on the torso. Dip in the solvent, and we'll start cleaning off the top. Okay, it wasn't quite as dirty as the bottom side, but still got that nice transition here. And it's leaving stuff in the recesses, which is what we want. It's adding that extra depth without us having to work at it, which is another thing I like about these makeup applicators, because they're kind of flat, so they don't dig in as easy, which I like. And you could, yeah, well, I guess I was getting ready to show an example of the difference, but I totally hit that rocket pod. Just, I was in the groove. It's what I do, and totally hit it. Yeah, so I'm liking that. We'll get the underside real quick here. I don't think that's going to be too bad. Get the undersides of his guns. And depending on how heavy-handed you were with the oil wash, the step can take more or less time. This one was not one of the worst ones I've done. I've had some that take me a little bit of time to clean because I was a little heavy-handed, but this is one of those where you can go back and do less because it's an oil wash and you can take stuff off. And I think you can't get to as easily as the recesses, but the top surface area, like if it dries really thick, you can get that off pretty easily. Not the end of the world. Whereas with your traditional acrylic paints, that is not always the case. They can be unforgiving. The oil washes a little bit more forgiving. And the beauty with the solvent is, like, if the oil washes are mixed, it's not as big of a deal, especially if the palette's pretty close. It's not like we're using a bright pink oil wash on top of another color or something that's gonna like clash with. So give ourselves one more cleanup swipe here, and I'm gonna come across the torso one more time, right here at the front. Just kind of give ourselves a little extra make sure, and there we go. We've got those nice, crisp, dark recesses, some extra gradation, and with this, what we would next do, which I will do, obviously, we'll let this dry, and then we'll hit it with a matte varnish, and then I'll show you guys what it'll look like in its current state. Boom! There's our Turkina. For whatever reason, I was having a Johnny Bravo moment. If you got that reference, you sirs, gents, ladies, ma'ams, everyone on both sides in between, all around, and you Canopian cat girls, if you got that reference, we can be friends, because you might have watched Cartoon Network as a kid, and that means you're a badass. If you don't get it, you might want to look up Johnny Bravo, Dexter's Laboratory, Powerpuff Girls, Samurai Jack, Courage the Cowardly Dog, and so much more that you missed out on in your youth on what is Cartoon Network. So, with our little bit of Johnny Bravo here, that is our Turkina with the matte varnish dry after the oil wash step and the enhancement of the colors. I really like how that's turned out. I think for a speed paint job, if you wanted to take that extra step, this one's worth it. No edge highlighting, none whatsoever. This is all dry brush and looks fan-freaking-tastic in my opinion. The next step for me would be manual edge highlights if I wanted to push it. I think this is actually really, really good. Then I would work on doing my decals. I'd prep for decals here, then start doing the rest of the details. It doesn't have to be in that order, but I don't know. I usually leave the decals for last, but sometimes I want to do it first because it really helps me feel like I'm getting towards that finish line. And then usually last I do the jeweling. I'm not sure on the Turkina where it goes because I'm not familiar with the Turkina and it looks goofy as but I'm painting it anyway. I assumed it was this little slit or visor here, but it could be that. As of filming this, by the time you guys could tell me if I was wrong or right, the other segments will have been filmed. But nonetheless, at least the techniques, whatever I do, whether I put them in the wrong place or not, at least you will hopefully have learned something. That said, please sound off in the comments below if this was helpful. If you used it on some minis of your own, share those Instagram links. Let me know what you're working on. If you have any thoughts, critiques, or anything at all, I'd love to hear what you have to say. Get that discussion going down below. As always, thank you guys for tuning in. I hope this was helpful. Stay tuned for future videos where we finish up this Turkina. And, yeah, keep rolling those dice, keep painting your models, and I will catch you guys next time. If you guys are still sitting here watching this, let's take a moment to put a pop-up here to showcase those wonderful Patreon supporters here. We'll let that scroll here. And thank you so much for supporting what I do. That's super awesome. I really do appreciate that.